Hello, welcome to Woods and Water Outdoors. I'm Patrick Corcoran. Second video that we're doing today. We recently had a request to do a threadfin shad pattern and from one of our previous videos. And this is how I chose to go about making the threadfin. I'm going to tie one up, but I wanted you to see it in the finish and walk through this a little bit. So the threadfin shad, if you're trying to imitate the crankbaits or whatever you see out there, you have a tricolor. You have a blue back with a silvery blue middle that has a yellow, fluorescent yellow looking lateral line, and then a grayish belly, which is what we have here. There's also a version that has a lavender back, dorsal area, and then the rest of it can be the same. So, and I'm sure there's others that have chartreuse dorsals and through the variants. So the more difficult portion of it, in my opinion, would be getting the black dot that's right behind the gills. And so making this jig, that's why we chose to use black thread right there. Instead of trying to do this with a chenille or something like that, I've always found that these triple colored jigs are tied in a thread neck a little easier. And that's just my personal preference. I'm sure there's some chenilles out there, but the hard part's going to be getting that black dot right behind the gills, even in a chenille, at least for me. Obviously, there may be somebody that understands how to do one of those on each side. I currently haven't found a good way to do that in my experimenting. So this is how we're going to tie this pattern today. We have our ghost grays in the belly, neck hackle, and in the middle for our flashing material, we use blue polar flash. The other two feather colors are going to be our radiation and our electric blue. I think you could go maybe a little lighter blue. I chose electric blue just because that's more of what that chrome dorsal kind of looks like on the crankbaits that I've looked at. So anyway, we'll get started. We're using a 1/8 ounce head that's painted in a candy lime and has a little bit of disco silver underneath it. I'm using a Minnow head, and I don't do a whole bunch of jigs with eyes, but I prefer to tie this style of jig with a Minnow head, and those molds only come with eyes in them, so we're going to use those. So the first thing we're going to do is tie in our polar flash. And I tie this, or I cut it double the length of the tail that I want, because I'm going to fold it over to try to build that body up in the center. And to keep the thread from working back towards the point of the hook, I'll just keep my fingers right there. So I just wrap against the tips of my fingers to keep that thread kind of right there, nice and tight. And we're going to put two little bunches on this. It's just a matter of how long you want that tail to be. I think as far as the amount of material, it takes a pretty good chunk of it, and so to get a good body. One thing that I do wish that, looking back now, that I would have kept a few of these heads with collars on them. I think that would help make this sort of jig, but we'll get it done. I don't want a real big, huge neck anyway. And so, okay, so there we have our polar flash put into the body. Next, we're going to tie the feathers that come into the top. And this is where we put our electric blue. You also use a baby blue, or maybe even our bluegrass right here. But you want to tie these feathers into the top quarter of your base right here and try to keep them on top of the bait. And you don't really have to worry about the fact that they're flared out. They will lay down. And I choose saddle hackle there mainly because I want that to be pretty narrow. I don't want it to be real broad. Neck hackle gets a little thicker, and it won't, when it gets wet, it'll be too dominant. And so next I'm going to tie in my belly, which is going to be our ghost gray. And I'm using that ghost gray to tone down that polar flash because it's pretty bright. If you've used much of that, when it's in the water, it really lights up. And so we'll be toning that down with the gray ghost into the belly. And so now we'll use our radiation. These are also saddle tips on the 4 to 6 inch, and you can see how narrow those are. Well, we're putting those in as our lateral. We want them to be narrow. If they're if you're using neck hackle there, again, that's just going to be too broad. So you see how that fits in there as a lateral line. Okay, and so we'll do both sides of that. I would say you want those to be just a hair shorter than the rest of your tail. I think I've got mine just barely shorter. I probably should have cut them another 1/4 inch shorter than what they are. Okay, and there we have it. And again, we use the black thread to give us that little dot behind the gill plates look. We're going to whip finish these thread necks twice. To make sure that that holds. There we go. And I use deep penetrating. You could use a UV resin here or whatever you want to use to seal that up. And there we have our version, number 1, of thread fin shad. And so that's how we came up with. Again, like I said, there's many different patterns you could go with this design, and for colors that you want to use, it'd be more about what's dominant in your area. And so I think this one right here would work here locally for us on a couple different lakes in North Texas. So we appreciate the request, and hope that you find this style useful. And we look forward to our next request and opportunity to come up with something to help you out. Thanks for watching.